Welcome to New Europe Studios, where you can watch us make the news. I'm speaking here today with Sir Jonathan Mills, who's a director of the Edinburgh International Festival.
I love.
J'ai beaucoup aimé.
The Edinburgh International
Festival.
And one of the leading cultural lights in Europe. And he's come to talk today about the festival in this most important year for Scotland, and of course a little bit about the role of Europe's culture. So first of all, Sir Jonathan, the world is kind of watching Scotland at the moment with the independence referendum. What do you see that's special about this year for the Edinburgh International Festival?
Well, of course there is an independence referendum on the 18th of September, but in addition to that we also have a number of other really important international initiatives. The Ryder Cup, the Commonwealth Games being hosted in Glasgow, and I don't wish to sound blasé about it, but in a sense the International Festival, and indeed all of the festivals in Edinburgh in August, are geared up to doing the kind of international work on a yearly basis. I guess we take that for granted. Just to give you a sense of that, last year we invited to my festival alone, and there are 8 in August, but just to the International Festival we invited artists from over 60 countries, and we had audiences from over 75, 80 countries. So international in terms of the artists that come, and international certainly in terms of the public that attend this event. So for us, I guess, doing an international event that has global significance is business as usual. It has an additional dimension this year, as you say, because of the question of independence, but it also has other significances. Not only the Commonwealth Games, where we are sharing cultural ties and sporting ties with nations that have a shared history and tradition with Scotland and indeed the UK, but also sharing ties with a whole range of other countries on the anniversary to the very month of the outbreak of the First World War. And if you think that the potency and influence of the First World War was important, then I think it's equally significant to acknowledge that the Edinburgh International Festival was a direct result of the outcome of the Second World War. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it, that one would actually have a festival as part of the framework in which people started to think about their lives returning to some kind of normality after a war. But perhaps not. Do we actually reach for statistics? Do we actually reach out to politicians or to political leaders, the people who've taken us into a war, or the people who actually give us a very narrow framework in which to experience our lives at moments of intense existential challenge? I don't think we do. What I think we do in those moments is we go to the most important things to us, our music, our culture, the greatest things that we have created, the flowering of our imaginations, not the rigid analysis of a kind of instrumentality that life grinds us down with. We'd had that for the best part of 20 or 30 years in Europe, and in fact Edinburgh's festivals were an incredibly important antidote to that process that had so underwhelmed and undermined people since the outbreak of the First World War.
I mean, you're bringing in some very, very important aspects in that we do reach towards art, we do reach towards culture in moments of crisis, in moments of confusion, and also to help explain. We remember perhaps with the First World War is now tied completely to the First World War poets, for example. the war requiems and all the other things that have come out from.
Excuse me. Sorry. You have to start that again.
We look back towards the First World War, and we look back towards the way that art and culture has tried to explain to us what's been going on, what happened. We think of a First World War poets who are just a deep part of our literature and culture now. So I think it's very interesting and perhaps a revelation to a lot of people that it was the war that gave birth to this cultural treasure house that the Edinburgh International Festival is. But what I would like to say is you were taken on and you've kept your job and you've been honoured rightly for it. There's something that the Edinburgh International Festival is clearly doing right about bringing up international culture and European culture and staging it so well. I hate to ask something that sounds obsequious, but what do you think you are doing that is right, that we can learn from?
I think the most important dimension of any international festival is the glimpse that it gives us into other people's worlds, into other ideas, into narratives, into languages, into attitudes and values that are not our own. And it does so in the framework of art. It doesn't do it as an immediate transaction. It doesn't do it as a kind of barter or a bargain. It does it in a much more subtle way. It actually does it in a dimension that is open to interpretation and that in many instances is not so explicit, but almost, in the case of music and poetry, has an element of it that is quite ephemeral, almost abstract. So it's not transactional. It's not actually giving people a sense that everything is literal, everything is rudimentary, everything is explainable. It gives a sense that there is a much bigger, much more complex world that doesn't, that certainly requires translation, but is not. But your own views are not going to be diminished. The potency of your own position in the world is not going to be reduced by a greater understanding of someone else's.
This brings back to a theme that I've seen in various other aspects of life, and that it's almost like you're teaching us a cultural empathy.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm teaching anything. What I'm hoping is that I'm encouraging people to look beyond their own immediate circumstances and, in a sense, experience for themselves, teach themselves that very empathy to which you refer. Of course, one of the interesting things in all of this, as a matter of historical coincidence, is that the Edinburgh International Festival comes along at about the same moment when there are political questions being asked, fundamental political questions that are being asked throughout Europe. I mean, we're slow learners. It took us 2 world wars to ask these questions about what will it take for us to not destroy each other? What will it take to stop this wholesale slaughter and self-annihilation? And it nearly happened. And it took 2 world wars for us to start to think about that. And as I'm talking to you in Brussels, at the centre of the political experiment that has become Europe today, with all of its challenges and all of its opportunities, I think we should not lose sight of the fact that from the outset, the greatest challenge that Europe posed for itself was a cultural challenge. It wasn't a financial challenge. It wasn't a challenge of politics. They had been undermined, they had been destroyed in terms of their credibility. It was a cultural challenge. What will it take for us to respect each other? What will it take for us to say, no, we won't eradicate a particular cultural sector or particular group of people? What would it take to us for us to instill that? And of course the challenges are ever present. The fact that in Germany one had extraordinary art, didn't protect that country
Yes.
against certain political extremism. And so there is no doubt that this is very fragile. It's not something that is clear cut and obvious. It's subtle, but what it needs is a great deal of nurturing, a great deal of patience, and a great deal of time. And throughout the last 68 years, that's precisely what Edinburgh International Festival and its other festivals have been going about. Very gently, very deliberately, using the opportunities, using the resources that we've had, and they're not massive resources, they're quite modest,
Yeah.
actually, but using those resources, holding them carefully, and making sure that this conversation that we had every summer since 1947 was an open-spirited conversation. It was, to quote Sir John Falconer, the Lord Provost, or the Lord Mayor at the time, a festival that he hoped would embrace the world. It would be a platform for the flowering of the human spirit. If you examine those phrases carefully, they're actually quite radical. They're very simple, they're very profound, but they're quite radical. This was not a festival whose aim was to be Eurocentric. It was a platform for the world in which we found it, to embrace the world as it became, not as we thought it should be made. So not to edit, not to censor, but to actually explore the richness of humanity and to explore positions and points of view other than our own as a matter of course.
I mean, that is absolutely fascinating, because you've answered the next half dozen questions that were coming to my mind. It is, why are we doing this? This is why we're doing this. And the other big thing I was wondering is with all of these festivals, why is Edinburgh working? Why is Edinburgh so well known? And it's quite clear from what you said, but inclusivity.
Well, I think there's a number
I
of
mean,
reasons.
I'm trying to
I'm
take that away from the way that it's
Yeah.
often used. I'm saying this is
I think there's
this
a
is for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I think that it's not just the inclusivity of the spirit of the event, and certainly there are many ways in which one can demonstrate that, but there's also a sense in which not just the International Festival, but all of these festivals together provide platforms of such diversity that there is something, if not for everyone, there is something for most people. I remember a gentleman who came from another festival. He was an enormous supporter of another European festival, and he says, I'm not going to mention the city, but I'm a guy who loves this festival. What am I doing in Edinburgh? He was there simply because one of the orchestras that he most admired was also in town, and his family had said, we've always wanted to go to Edinburgh, let's see what it's like. And I said, well, I'm not going to predict your reaction to this. Let's talk in a day or two when you're here. He was mildly hostile, he was mildly haughty that he was being taken away from this other festival to come to this windswept sort of out of godforsaken Scottish outpost. And at the end of those 3 days he said, I can't not come back here. Not just because I've enjoyed myself, but because I have never been able to get my family to come to this other place. It's just for me. My wife doesn't like it, and my children certainly don't. But in Edinburgh in August, there is really something for my whole family to do. My children go to the Fringe, my wife goes to the book festival, we all join forces in various places. We've had an amazing time. I sort of now get it. What that man was talking about, though, was was jettisoning his preconceptions, and in his case, I think even a certain degree of snobbery, and to actually start to go into and join into what I would call a festival spirit, a festival space. And what is a festival space? It is a space where you allow yourself as an individual to do something that you would otherwise not be prepared to do. You are prepared to do something that is contrary to your own personality, You dare to be different in a way. And the great examples of that, most extreme examples of that, are places like Mardi Gras and Boxing Day, where in the case of Mardi Gras, men dress as women, women dress as men. So there is a kind of change of gender going on. And if you can do that in a very structured society, you can probably do anything. Or in the case of Boxing Day, where servants are served by those they usually serve. So the hierarchy is upended. So in a festival, for a festival to work, there has to be a certain amount of anarchy almost. I don't say that lightly, and I'm not advocating anarchy itself, but the social mores for the period of the festival are turned on their head. And that's certainly the experience that one has in a city as sedate as Edinburgh, which is a very serious-minded, very judgmental place in many ways. But for the period of August, I have really heard quite straight-laced, middle-aged women who would, in any other month of the year, be outraged by the spectacle of some, multi-breasted, bearded phenomenon dressed in green slime, saying of that person as they walk past them nonchalantly in the high street, that wasn't nearly as outrageous as the thing we saw yesterday, or that wasn't nearly as inventive as the thing we saw last week, or something like that. And so, in a sense, for the period of the festival, the whole of the society gives itself permission to kind of change gear. And that's what a festival can provide to a society and to a community.
I would like to first of all really just thank you for explaining something that I've experienced, because the Edinburgh Festival, being there is everything. It's something where people really should make an effort to go and be part of this. It's almost like an ongoing art installation where
and of course a lot of people do go. I mean, we have in August the best part of 1 million people who don't live in Scotland or live in Edinburgh who come to the festival itself. And so, of course, you're absolutely right to suggest that this event is something you have to experience live. It's not something that you can get value out of, or the complete value out of, by simply being on the internet or being kind of remote from it. You can get a certain flavour of it, to be sure, but it's something that you actually have to go and immerse yourself in. That's the other point I would say, is that it's an immersive experience. It's a perambulatory experience. You should walk to places. You should feel the potency of everyone else and their buzz around you. And that can't work in certain kinds of locations. Big cities are not naturally conducive to having great festivals. And when you think of the great festivals in Europe, you immediately think of cities that are quite small and compact. Spoleto, Salzburg, Avignon, Edinburgh. These are cities that one can arrive in and get a sense of their scale almost immediately. And for the period of the festival, the city is the domain in which your imagination can run riot, rather than these huge sprawling cities where arguably they have so much activity going on every day that nothing like a festival is particularly unusual or particularly special. And I can assure you that if you are in Edinburgh, every moment that you are there in August, you are absolutely reminded 24 hours a day that a festival is happening. You don't have to imagine that that's the case. You see it, you live it, you breathe it. For every moment that you're there. I mean,
I'm trying to understand this because, I don't have an arts and cultural background or an education. So, this really is always a journey of real discovery for me. You can always go and you can find something you've never even thought existed. You can see whole different ways of thinking, of behaving, of celebrating, of everything that you've never seen there. It's a wonderfully challenging yet a very friendly environment. But the thing I find about Edinburgh and being at the festival ties in with what you've been saying about other things, and this is kind of what culture is. It's life plus. The Edinburgh Festival is more than the sum of its parts, and some of its parts is amazing, but it's more than that. The experience we get out of it is more than we can describe. I can go there and tell you what I saw and what I thought, but it doesn't capture that plus that culture brings to it, that art brings to it. You've mentioned before about how art and culture has helped us get out of the very abyss of the worst of humanity's actions. So I'd like to just really ask you before we finish off now is, with the situation that Britain, Scotland, Europe and the world is in right now, is what can we do to improve our cultural life, to bring out more of this creativeness in our people and to enable people to get more involved in the creative arts? Have you got any insights on that for us?
It's a very large and very complex
I apologise for that
question, but I think it's a very appropriate one for the times we're living in. The first thing I would say is that there ought to be some recognition of the availability of culture, that culture should not be seen as something that is an optional extra, that it is fundamental to us. And we live in times that are all too ready to analyse into oblivion every dimension of human existence. And the measurements themselves become part of the problem. We are so highly calibrated in the economic language that we use that we have lost sense of how to be human to each other. And statistics and measurements and engineering of problems, whilst highly efficient, are only one part of what it is to be human. And I would suggest that in the most recent decades, that those kinds of activities, to the exclusion of everything else, have not put us in the best position that we might be in.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing to say. We have to start to think about different calibrations, different measurements. Second thing to say is that if Edinburgh and Salzburg and Avignon are examples, this also makes very good economic sense. For a very modest amount of money, there is an enormous return on that investment. It's not direct, it's not a dividend to the City Council or to the Scottish Arts Council or Creative Scotland for the money they give us, but it is an enormous dividend to the Scottish economy, to Scotland's reputation, but mostly in very indirect ways to the to the hoteliers, to the restaurateurs, to the business people of Edinburgh. To put that in context, for the period of August itself, 3 million tickets are issued to festival events, all of these 8 festivals. 27,000 artists come to Edinburgh, and they participate in, if you include everything, 40,000 individual performances of 5,000 specific shows in over 350 venues. This room, even this little part of this room, would be a quite spacious venue for some of the fringe shows. And so there is a sense in which the city is being performed in its entirety, and that, all of that summation of that activity for a few £1 million, maybe it's 10, I'm not sure, but a few £1 million is actually worth to the Scottish economy something in the order of £265 million of economic return. So it's an important cultural opportunity. It makes good financial sense, and if one starts to extrapolate from that, one of the things that I think that we need to be doing in Europe, particularly at times of unemployment and particularly times of of challenge to youth unemployment is starting to think about skills, cultural opportunities, not just the great virtuosi of whom there will be few, but giving people a sense that through their education they can have a relationship to culture. One of the most disastrous things that I think the British government did in the last 20 or 30 years was make a relationship that a child at school has with culture an optional extra as part of their curriculum. If actually those places that are really building economic potential and potency for themselves, places like Korea and places like China, they're starting as robustly as they can to make sure that culture is a very fundamental part of any child's education. So there is that dimension as well. Taking from that, one could start to extrapolate that there's a whole range of skills that fold out from this, and they are skills that are equally applicable to large cities and to small locations. I mean, one of the great places that I visit very regularly is the city of Sibiu, which is in the middle of Transylvania in Romania. And it's interesting, is it not, that the enlightenment of that mayor, with help from a number of extraordinary cultural visionaries like Constantin Kyriak, a marvellous person who lives in Sibiu and runs the festival and the theatre there. Well, certainly there is a great example of how Sibiu is a much more prosperous place than so many other places in Romania. And you look at the one statistic that's different, it's their spend and attention to, not just money, but their attention to the cultural life of the city. It enhances our sense of community, it enhances our sense of well-being, and it enhances also our economic prosperity as well. It makes good business sense and it makes good lifestyle sense.
I think that really is the argument in a nutshell, because this is about, as you say, humans. We are not just economic units, and sometimes it's very easy for those in positions of power and responsibility to almost reduce us to that. Festivals and cultural events are economically viable because they involve people, they generate income, but also, as you said, the virtuoso pianist there has a piano tuner, he has a piano maker, he has a stall maker, he has a concert hall that needs to have...
He might in fact inspire a young person watching him or her to in fact take up that instrument. And it doesn't matter whether they're good, it matters that they participate.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this is a point because we all need to have a space where we can be creative in one way or another. And there's so many ways and so many levels. We're not all going to be virtuosos, and as you can explain, we don't all have to be. But also there is this culture is life plus. We can make the economic case for it in a city. We can make an economic case for bringing all these international artists together. But there's also that question of inspiration, whether at the Edinburgh Festival with this unique mixture of international artists, they're inspiring the audience and they're inspiring each other. And none of these can have a financial value put on them. But I think many people would say that this side of life is as valuable as anything else. Am I making...
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. Thank you for that free advertisement for what all of us who are involved in the cultural sector and in festivals are saying regularly. It is the case, I would also add, that governments are starting to appreciate more than ever that pure reference to a GDP of a country, pure economic statistics in their purest form are an inadequate measure and gauge of the health and the wealth of any society. They are very blunt instruments and they should not be used too often. They tell us certain things, but they leave out so much more than they actually reveal.
I mean, it's been wonderful to meet you and to hear this, you know, and I wish you every success at the festivals and all those who are working in Edinburgh. And I hope that you carry on this flame, this cultural flame in the north of the European Union, and I hope you're doing your best, as you are saying, to encourage other people. And also, you know, branch down in Australia, because you're also working in festivals at the other end of the world. So I don't know how you do it. I know the job you have is tremendously important, and there are a great many people behind you. And I'm sure all of us at New Europe would love to wish you all the best for this year and congratulate you on everything you've achieved so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.